Welcome to the Elokus podcast, and this is class number 7 in the discourse Miman Afar Yakov, 5672, which is the eighth discourse in the overall book, Bishashek Dimu, 5672. And this is class number 2 in chapter 30. Okay. So, in general, in this discourse, we're learning the three stages that exist, or the three stages in the evolution of the oiros, of the or pnimi, of the internal light. The internal light means they are vest themselves in vessels, and their journey into the state of investment into the vessels is a three-pronged journey. The light exists in three stages. First of all, we find this light as it is still within the womb of the Ein Sof. And on that level, we said it is totally one with the Ein Sof, and it's called Chad, totally one. And the 10 spheros on that stage are completely indifferentiable. And then there is the next stage when there is the tzimtzum and the contraction. And then the first light comes out. It emerges, so to speak, to reveal itself. When it reveals itself, the 10 spheros already become each one separate. There is already a differentiation in the spheros. However, because the connection between the previous state, when the Or was completely one with the source, when it was completely Ein Sof, when you couldn't see anything, and which means it was on a very, 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 very high level of pshitus, of simplicity, and now its descent into a state of revelation, although it was through a tzimtzum, but the tzimtzum is not a siluk, a complete removal, but rather the tzimtzum is a reduction. Therefore, the simplicity of the source is still felt within these lights. And therefore, although they are already definable lights, or rather they are already specific lights, they're still undefinable. And that's why we refer to it as Esses Spheros Belima. They are 10 spheros without any substance, which means you still feel in them very much Ein Sof. Infinity, beyond definition, simplicity. They have no character. Although there is character, but it's still non-character. As we discussed, it's like, yeah, no. And the point over here is that really they should be having character, because they've already separated themselves. Each potential already emerged, but they're still being overpowered by their state when earlier they're still sensing their state, expressing their original state, and in their original state they were one with the Ein Sof. So that original Chad now expresses itself as Echad. There's a difference. Their original singularity is extending itself into their individual into their individualness, to turn them into a state of oneness, and that all of them are still interlooped and intertwined one with the other, and they're called Esses Spheros Beli Ma, without a substance. And as we're going to learn now, as we learned in last class, they're still considered elevated from all definitions of the world. As we say in the two phrases, the one phrase, but the two parts of the phrase in the blessings of the Shema in the morning. HaMelech, the king, HaMerumam, who was exalted, Levado, alone, Meyaz, from ever, from way back then, which is from ever, which is referring to, as we discussed earlier, the first stage of Malchut, of kingship, which is, as we said, the Malchus to Ein Sof, the Malchus of the Ein Sof, which are the Esses Spheros when they're still inside the Ein Sof. In this state, they're exalted, but their exaltedness is a very, very essential exaltedness, which means it's not an exalted in comparison to anything else, because nothing else can exist yet. You can't compare it to anything else. So when it is exalted in itself, for itself, not in a comparative manner. It's essentially without infinite and beyond definition. Of course, it's exalted, but not exalted from this or from that. You're not measuring it up to anything. However, once the tzimtzum takes place, and there is already Hashem clears, so to speak, the possibility for something to exist, and he's introducing the infinite light to back into the equation, into the space where it's possible, at least, for something to exist. And then, but the infinite light itself now emerging as the Kav, now emerging as a power that contains within it 10 spheros that are in essence already individualized with character, but because the characteristics of this stage is not yet felt and seen, because as we said earlier, the source above this level doesn't allow, is felt within this level itself, and therefore the differentiating spheros are not really seen and felt as different spheros, which means you still don't feel the character of the spheros, which means the chachma on this level is not even called chachma. As we said earlier, it's lav b'chachma yediyah. It's not with a knowable chachma. So it's not, for all practical purposes, it's not even chachma. Even though it is chachma, it's not chachma. Like he said that the chachma stima, we learned earlier, the level of chachma stima, the level of chachma of keser, which in general is lights without vessels, on that very high level, before they're mislavish, before they're enclosed in kelim, the character is not character. It's character, but not character. Therefore, we say, Hamisnase, he is elevated miyamos olam, from the days of the world. What does the days of the world mean? The divine energies of the world. Days of the world, day means revelation. The revelations of God that produce the world. What is that? That is already the lights that go into vessels. He said it's the Ze'er Anpin, or in general, all the spheroids of Atzilus, where the Oiros come into vessels, where the character, and that's called, and the reason why we say he's elevated from the days of the world, because those 10 characteristics, which make up the 10 spheres of Atzilus, that's the essential character of all possible existence. Because everything that exists in the entire cosmic order is made up of a different blend of these various different 10 building blocks of creation. As it says in the Midrash that God created the world with 10 blocks, or with 10 powers. And these are these 10 spheres. So that means, and that's why this is called elevated, because everything in it, everything has a definition. The most abstract things are still have character, have definition. It's a very subtle character, but there is character. But this level is beyond character. And that's what it means it's elevated. Because when something is beyond any character and energy, it's essentially infinite. And therefore, how much is infinite elevated? It's elevated without an end. But its elevation is already an elevation to creation. In other words, compared to creation, or the divine energies of creation, which they are characterized, this is non-characterized light. But since its non-characterization is not because of it itself, but because its origin, the light, while it was still before the tzimtzum, in the Orin Sof, is still influencing it. Why? Because the tzimtzum that happened to separate it, the contraction that separates stage A from stage B, which in this case means the first stage of the light to the second stage of the light. Remember, we're talking about 3 stages over here. So the second stage are separated not by a complete tzimtzum, but by a narrowing of the light. So some thread is still coming through. And over there was absolute pshitus, absolute simplicity. So therefore, that simplicity is still influencing over here to make it be without character. In comparison to, compared to the Orein Sof itself, before the tzimtzum, it's considered real character. But compared to actual character of creation, and then when we say of creation, I mean even of the world of worlds, even of Atzilus, which is the world of emanation, compared to that character, this is considered non-character. Like he says, The idea that let's go back to every line is so important to understand. He said earlier, he brings as a proof to this, he says that Chachma Stima is not even considered Chachma, which means this concealed level of Chachma, which is essentially this level, the lights before they go into the vessels. It's Chachma Stima, is not even considered Chachma. In other words, from the perspective of Chachma, of wisdom, if you introduce it to the energy of the very energy of Chachma, why before it settles into the vessels of Chachma, and that's what the idea of in the Keser state, it's not even called Chachma. It's a whole different thing. It's not Chachma. Why? Because it doesn't have definition. But not because it doesn't. It is. It's the very same energy that's going to be in Chachma later, downstream. But because it's still influenced by the source, you don't feel Chachma there. You don't feel Chachma. And that's the reason why you say on this level, that he's exalted from the days of the world. So this was a brief review to where we're holding now. And now we learn, right? Let's go back to these lines. This is about 10 lines into chapter 30. And this that it says that he's exalted from the days of the world. This is already referring to the light, as it reveals itself, with the intention, it reveals itself already to go into vessels. However, it didn't go into the vessels yet. Before it's already revealing itself to be able to go into vessels, but it didn't yet vest itself in the vessels. It's no more exalted alone. It's no more in its essential state of elevation, in its essential exaltation. Since it's already a revealed light, for it to become already a source to the lights of that. This is considered a makar. It's considered a source. And if it's considered a source, it's not essentially exalted. However, it's still compared to the next stage, it is exalted. But he says, he's elevated from the days of the world. Because these lights, they are also belima, without substance. They're still in a state of simplicity. They're elevated. They are still elevated from the days of the world. What does the days of the world means? These are the days of the Ze'erampin, are the 6 emotions, which are really the building blocks of the 6 days of creation, which God creates everything in 6 days. So really it's still 6 emotions. And now he says he extends it even more. You don't have to say only the emotions. V'yoymin, and the days, the esesphiras tatzilus b'chlal, of all 10, not just the 6 that are very interactive with creation, but even the first 3 that are a notch higher, but they are also called already yoymin, they're already considered days. This is where we were holding. Now we continue further. In general, we can say now he summarizes these 2 levels, and then he's going to bring us the 3rd level. In general, we can say that these 2 levels, these are considered atik and arech. We know that keser, which keser serves as keser is the crown, which is still above atzilus. And in general, we say that keser is an intermediate state between the matzil, the emanator, which is the Orein Sof itself, and the Netzalin and the world of Atzilus and the spheres of Atzilus. So the middle state between them is exactly this idea of the lights before they go into vessels. Atzilus is where vessels begin. But in Keser, there's no vessels. And in Keser, we learn all the time, since it's a mediator, we learned that a mediator has to speak both languages. It needs to represent the matzil, the emanator, and it needs to represent the netzalim, the emanations. So the lower part of the keser is already the beginning of the emanations. It's not yet them. It's still considered a mediating state. It's not yet the emanations, but it's already the preparatory state for emanations. And that's the lower part of keser. The higher part of keser is the part of keser that's receiving from the Orein Sof. and therefore still representing Or Ein Sof, which is not yet a source for creation. And these two, and therefore it's called, the higher one is called Atik. Atik means removed, because it's removed from being a source. And if it still represents the Matzil, the emanator, which is the Or Ein Sof, that's removed from everything. So even though this is already part of the intermediary stage, it's where the transition is happening, but it's the higher element of the transition. It's the input, where the input of the Ein Sof is going in, not the output. There's always an input where it's going in, and then it's transitioning and it's going out. This is the input. It's where like the waters are going down and from the streams and are going into the lake. And then there is the outlet of the lake, where already became lake water, and then the lake water continues out into the lower streams. It's two different streams. So this is the input. It's one lake, and the lake over here would be Kesser, and this is the place where the waters are flowing in of the Ein Sof. And that's still Atik. It's still sensed very much Ein Sof, removed from the worlds. The next level, the lower level, which is a source for creation, it's called Arich. What's the meaning of Arich? Arich means the long one. What is it long? It means long what? It's the long powers of the Sphirot. The Sphirot are short because they're already limited. This is the long, but the very fact that you're calling them long, it's the very Sphirot, but in a long way, which means it's already a source for them. That's in general what we say in Kesser. So now what he wants to say is, and usually we say that the world of Atzilus has its own Keter, the Keter that's above Atzilus. And this level of Keter is much lower than what we're talking about over here, than the light of the Kav, and especially the Esses Firis Agnuzos. This is way, way above of the usual discussion of Atik and Arich. However, if you paint with a very broad brush, and in a sense you're looking at all the levels above Atzilus as one singular level, all the way, all the levels of preparatory stages, all the way to God himself, to Atzmos, and you look at everything in between as kind of a mediating level of Keser, then we say like this. The Esses Spheres Agnuzos, the first level that we spoke about of the light, where the light is still in the womb of the Ein Sof, that is called Atik. Why is that called Atik? Because over there, it's Merumam Levada. It's exalted alone. It's above. It's completely removed. But it's not, doesn't have any relationship with the creation at all. Because what did we say earlier? Hashem is ready to limit himself. There is a desire, there's a hashara, there is a estimation. And even though we discussed, remember in last class, that the estimation is not the estimation of the vessels, it's just the estimation of himself. How we gave an example, how he will feel in his house. He's not thinking about the house. It's all about him, so it's still not yet creation. That's why it's Atik. But here's understand something. When you say something is removed, Atik, the very fact that you're saying it's removed is already a relationship. It's removed from creation. So it's already a relationship. Why are we saying this? Because the Or Ein Sof, that's higher even than the 10 spheres Agnuzas. Remember what we used to call earlier when we were discussing Or Ein Sof A, the level of the spheros Ein Kates, where the spheres are infinite, before there is even Alos Aratz, and where the lights are completely pashut, absolute pshitus, absolute. That's not even called Atik. That's completely out of the equation. That would be considered matzil, the emanator. That's not yet the journey. That's even prior to the journey to creation. It's God expressing himself unrelated to the worlds completely. It's not even called Atik. So it's because it's not yet the memutza. It's not yet the mediator. Where does this mediation begin? When there is the 10 spheres agnuzais, which since they're 10 spheres already, so we can begin saying already that this is already God dropping down already, lowering already. This is already considered a mediator. Now, this level, however, since this stage is still completely Ein Sof, because these spheres agnuzais are completely lost in the Ein Sof, and they're chad, real, completely chad. That's why they're atik. They're removed from creation completely. The kav, once there is the tzimtzum and the contraction, and that light gets hidden down to a tiny mill or whatever, and what emanates afterwards is the kav. The kav, as we discussed over here, is considered already, which is the oir before, that's already, you have already oiros. Before you don't even have lights. You have one light. You have the oir Ein Sof. You don't have lights. Here you have already lights because the oiros have emerged. They're still without vessels. So the light is still very pasha, but it's still, this level, as we said earlier, is pasha, is simple, but simple not because of itself, simple because a little bit of the origins are still affecting them, and that's why it's simple. That's why this level is called arich. It's still Ein Sof. That's why arich means long, the long face. It's still Ein Sof, but it really already has the seeds of creation. It really has already the seeds of the spheres, of the actual spheres. So this is the arich level of, so the atik would be the before pre-tzimtzum, and the arich is the kav, the oir Ein Sof after tzimtzum. So let's read it over here. B'derech klal yesh loim the beis b'chinas elu and b'chinas atik v'arich. Commercial isbar el Perek Tezvav. We said Perek Tezvav. Now one will ask and say, before the level of atik yomin is much later. The level of atik yomin is way post tzimtzum. Let's remember, after the tzimtzum, the first parts of that emerges after the tzimtzum, the first configuration is Adam Kadmon. After Adam Kadmon, we have the world called Olam HaNekudim, which is like the concept of Tohu. And after the Nekudim comes the world of right. And that, and in Adam, in the world of Nekudim, that's when you start developing the concept of Keter, of the crown. So there's still a whole configurations that are happening in between. And here we're saying that the Or Ein Sof Shalifnei Tzimtzum, that's called Atik. And usually Atik is much later. So that's why he's going to prove, you're right. If we're looking at the tiny little of our small little world of our solar system, Atzilus, Bri, Yatzir, and Asiya, that's what I mean, our solar system. And individually, yeah. But if you look at the entire sketch, then he's bringing now from what we learned earlier in chapter 15, that the atik of Adam Kadmon, which is the ultimate atik, the atik of everything, is the Esespheres Agnuzos. As he says, the Esespheres Agnuzos, the 10 hidden spheres, and atik, the Adam Kadmon. They are the atik, they are the crown of Adam Kadmon, and within the crown of primordial man, they are the crown of the crown, the atik. As he said, that's the higher level. But then the light of the kav, which is the light that comes forth after the tzimtzum. This is the general, the level of arich. Why he says bechlal is that really there is going to be a much later atik and arich coming forth, where the later atik is lower than this arich, than this level of arich. But and usually atik is infinitely higher than arich. And here we're saying that this level is called arich. He said bechlal. It depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about in the macro or we're talking in the micro. Here we're talking in the macro. In the macro, even the light of the kav is considered already a source for creation. As opposed to the Esespheres Agnuzos, that's not a source. That's netak, that's removed. The imayos, even though b'chenas makar Esespheres, but we still call it arich, which means it's still keser, it's still above, and it's still infinite. That's what the general idea of keser. It's a sovev light. It's an encompassing light. It's not yet going into vessels. It's still infinite. The imayah is b'chenas makar Esespheres, even though it's a source for the 10 spheres. Makol makam, nevertheless, it's exalted. It's elevated from them. And all of this is in the lights. When we say the lights, we mean the lights before they vest themselves in Kalim. They are in a state of pshitos. The gamadrega bezanel, even the second level, which means notwithstanding how much lower this is than from the first level, when it's still embedded in the Ein Sof. Now it's already emerging out. But even the second level, unlike the 10 spheres of Atzilus, that is already called that it has substance. Even though there's already 10 levels over here, it's not like the 10 spheres agnuzos, where even though they're 10, it's all one. It's not 10. Here these are separate letters because they reveal themselves already. There's a revelation already. The abstraction is still dominating. They're still b'bchinas b'lima, and the reason is not because of them themselves, but because their source is influencing that. Since the tzimtzum, which means what separates them and the original light is the tzimtzum, is the contraction that contracts, and then the light reemerges after the tzimtzum. But that contraction that separated them from stage number one is what? Is only b'bchinas miyot, only in a reduction. Therefore, some of the originality comes through, and the original is pshitus, is simple. So some of that, and therefore, even a tiny bit of that pshitus is still left over, and it makes that these lights are also considered pashut to canal. And just like as we said earlier, chachma stima, the hidden level of chachma, shehi lamayla ma chachma, legabe chachma hagluya. In comparison to revealed chachma, this level of chachma is considered lamayla ma chachma. It's completely beyond wisdom. Or like, remember those, if you recall, a long time ago, we learned about Hillel and Shammai, who were students of Shmai and Avtalion. And Hillel and Shammai, who were great two rabbis of the Mishnah, they had whenever they studied something, Shammai would see it from a very strict and stringent lens, because that was his character of his soul, in a very gevurah way. And every concept he would learn, he would taint it with a gevurah lens. He would see it in a red color, and Hillel would see every concept. He would taint it in a color of kindness, in a leniency. And even though they both sat by the same teacher and learned the very teaching that Shmai and Avtalion said, Hillel walked out one way and Shammai walked out another way. So we learned that's because the characteristics begins in Hillel and Shammai, but Shmai and Avtalion, in the teacher's teaching, the energy is still very abstract and pure, and it's not leaning this way or that way. They received it now, but we said, remember that there must be seeds, hidden seeds of stringency, of chesed, or of gevurah, of stringency in already Shmai and Avtalion, his teachings, and there are hidden seeds. Hidden, or I'm not going to use seeds, let's use hidden notes of kindness already in Shmai and Avtalion's teachings. But while it's in the teacher's teaching, it's not pronounced. And when Hillel and Shammai took it, each one takes it into their vessels, and they begin to highlight those hidden notes. Like we said, the wine taster who writes the description of the wine brings forth these hidden quiet notes that no one would realize that there's blackberry and vanilla or some kind of bark over there or whatever. It's you need a good wine taster to write it down, and once he writes it, everybody feels those. Not everybody, everybody that wants to fool themselves, that they feel the tiny little echoes. No, maybe let's not make fun of the wine drinkers, but the wine connoisseurs who actually like taste all these hidden notes. I enjoy sipping the wine and knowing that they have all these notes. But the idea is that once it's already revealed, it's sensed. But you have to be but it's so subtle. So that's the idea over here. The Svar is coming from Hillel and Shammai. So once they go into Hillel and Shammai, that's already the next level. That's like the lights vesting themselves already in vessels. Shmai and Avtalion's teachings are like the lights before they go into vessels. So in our case, in those lights, what we learned earlier, there is chesed, gevurah, tever. These the 10 spheres, because they even, not only do they exist there, they exist even in the source. But in the source, they're one with the Ein Sof. Here, they're already 10 spheres, 10 notes, but so subtle that they're undetectable. And when they will go into vessels, they will be detectable. Like we said, chapter 13. They got Gimel in the third level. Is the lights when they actually vest themselves in the vessels. Then they are grasped. They become completely enclosed, bekalim, in vessels. Until they become kefim mohusakelim. The lights actually get grasped by the vessels, and the lights themselves, and then the vessels bring out these notes into a conscious state, into a pronounced state. And then, they don't have any erech at all, legabe or. They become so vesseled that they become similar to the vessels, which they've already transitioned away from from pure light, from what the light was when the light was light. Okay, we're going to leave it over here, and as Hashem tomorrow's class, we're going to conclude.